Are we live? Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us for this discussion on the cost of living crisis. Pressure on household income is increasing. It's driven by rising energy costs, inflation and wage stagnation. Decades of policies which prioritise profits along with the decimation of the social safety net have ensured that it's the poorest and most vulnerable people who are being hit the hardest. Today, we're joined by a host of speakers who will tell us more about the cost of living crisis, what it is, why we're here, and how to resist it. I'm Chantelle Lunt. I'll be chairing this discussion, and I'll just tell you a bit more about the structure of the event, and then we'll get started. I'm going to hand over to each of our speakers who'll talk to you for about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have some Q&As. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments. Before I hand over to the first speaker, just a note to say that the event is hosted by The World Transformed. It's free to attend, but it's only made possible if you contribute or support. And if you could please consider donating it's just about the cost of a coffee to cover the running costs of these events. Just head over to The World Transformed donation page and see if you can give a little amount of coffee or a click. Now, I'm going to hand over to James Meadway. James is the director of Progressive Economy Forum and was the economic advisor to the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. James, could you tell us a little bit more about the economic context of the cost of living crisis and how we've ended up at this juncture?
Sure, thanks for the opportunity to say a few things. I think I'm here to try and, well, as Chantelle said, give a bit of a sort of broader picture of why we're here, why it is that suddenly prices are going up all over the place, that people's wages aren't going as far as they used to because prices have risen, why it is that, for instance, the government is now also talking about increasing some taxes in April, which is going to hit a whole bunch of people in work very hard. And I think that the starting point for this, if you're looking at what's happened in the last probably just over a year now, since early 2021, is prices of some very important goods, ones that we tend to use quite a lot of. So things like gas, for example, natural gas coming out of the North Sea or elsewhere in Europe or Russia, as we've all discovered, started to increase in price. That the price of food of different kinds, some staples like, well, coffee, the price of coffee is up 40% over the year or so. Wheat has shot up enormously, just in particular coming up into this year. That there's a whole load of things that we have to consume one way or the other, in the kind of society we live in, to keep the standard of living that we're used to if it's gas, it's to heat our homes, some of it for electricity. If it's wheat, I mean, fairly obviously this is like essential for any amount of food. If it's coffee beans and it goes into coffee, the prices of all these things started coming up over the last year or so. And what we've heard from all sorts of places, actually, most recently, people might remember that Andrew Bailey, who is the governor of the Bank of England, suggested this in an interview, that when he was asked, why are prices rising? Of course, the Bank of England is supposed to be there to try and stop prices rising. It's supposed to be there to control inflation. When he was asked why are prices rising, what can we do about it? He basically says, well, this is bad, and it means that everybody ought to have a bit of restraint in their wages. They ought to ask for less money, less pay rise this year, and really look to try and tighten their belts a bit, because that's how we're going to bring prices back down again. This is kind of nonsensical. It's quite widely believed. And perhaps if this was the 1970s, let's say, and you had very strong trade unions who were asking for really big pay rises, that then big companies were going to turn into big price rises, and then unions would ask for more pay rises, perhaps something like that might have arguably have happened in the 70s. But now, with strike days rising a little bit, but really at all-time lows or very close to them, with union membership a fraction, especially in the private sector, of what it used to be, and then more importantly, or more particularly, when you've got inflation that's turning up because the price of natural gas has risen, and we import that natural gas from Qatar, it really doesn't matter if you pay a nurse or a teacher or a bin worker or somebody who works in a shop or whoever less in in Britain, that makes no difference to the price of natural gas that you're getting from Qatar. It makes no difference whatsoever to the price of coffee that you're buying from Brazil. No difference from wheat that you might import from Canada. None of these things are affected by that. The other one that sometimes turns up, and it's a right-wing argument, which is that the idea that, oh, well, we've printed all this money over the last year to basically pay for the costs of furlough and other support in COVID, that the amount of money the Bank of England has printed through something called quantitative easing has grown enormously. And because all that money's out there chasing the same amount of goods and services, prices go up. There's more money chasing the same amount of stuff, so prices start to go up. And sometimes you hear this, but it doesn't really work. Because if you look over the last 10 years or so, at least since 2008, early 2009, the Bank of England has printed billions of pounds worth of new money. 850 billion pounds worth of new money in quantitative easing has gone into the system. Most of that, in practice, has turned into actually quite wealthy people buying assets. Principally in Britain, that means buying property. So driving up the price of property, it hasn't turned into price rises everywhere else. We've created all this money for 10 years, not just the bit in coronavirus. And prices over those 10 years they've gone up a bit and then they've gone down a bit and then they've gone up a bit and inflation turned negative for a while. They've gone all over the place. There's no obvious relationship between the government printing more money electronically with quantitative easing and that turning into price rises. So if you want to get your head around what is actually happening here, I think there's a couple of things that are going on, joined in the last week or so by another really quite terrifying prospect. The first bit is the disruption of COVID itself, that if you have a world that's hit by this virus and then lots of places impose lockdowns or people don't go to work or there's lots and lots of disruption that happens to how the world economy is organized, you end up with things like a big shortage of semiconductors, which is now happening and which means that the price of cars has gone up because cars need the semiconductor chips and you can't make the car without the chips, so there's fewer cars around, so the price goes up. Or you end up with lots and lots of container ships stacked up in ports, so you can't distribute, you can't transport goods quite as easily as you used to because you had these big lockdown, everything got frozen, and now you're trying to work your way through this supply chain crisis, as it gets called. So that's one part of it, that's the sort of COVID bit of it. The second part of it is something that has become, I think, really obvious over the last few years, which is that, look, you can barely open the newspaper without seeing some report of some extreme weather that's happened. So, I mean, take coffee. Why has the price of coffee gone up so much in the last year? Well, it's because there was a massive frost in Brazil. Really, weather going haywire. It's affected the coffee crop. There's less coffee around. There's been less that we've been able to grow. So the price has gone up as a result of that. Similar thing with wheat and other grain over the last year. Droughts in Canada. Actually, weirdly, a similar thing with semiconductors started to kick in. There was a drought in Taiwan. You need lots of water to make these semiconductor chips. They couldn't get the water. It starts to affect the supply of chips. So this extreme weather, which is a product of climate change and it's getting worse, is starting to impact on prices on the other side. The final bit that's coming, and this is going to be particularly important over this year, is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, that is a terrible thing to happen in itself, but then there's all these economic consequences that follow from that. The Russia and Ukraine between them produce 39% of the world's wheat exports. So if that's trade is disrupted, there's less wheat around, so likely as not the price starts to creep up here. That you find that the Russian economy produces huge amounts of nickel, which is used for batteries, for stainless steel, so the price of that has shot up in the last year or so, in the last week or so. Oil and gas, most obviously the price of oil is close to or just about at all-time highs. It's about $127 a barrel now. It's shot up over the last year or so because of this disruption to supply in Russia, and the price of natural gas is set to increase as well, particularly if further sanctions are imposed. So all this put together adds up to a picture of a very, very disrupted world. COVID, and then extreme weather conditions, and then war taking place, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Put all this together and everything gets disrupted. And you can look at this and think, well, then there's nothing really we or anybody else can do. But I don't think that's quite true. That if you have a system where, okay, supply of something is reduced, it's harder to get hold of semiconductors, it's not so easy. Actually, that's not quite true in oil, but it's harder to grow wheat than it used to be. It's harder to make some different kinds of goods out there in the rest of the economy. And then the companies making these things see that it's harder to do this and put up the price. And that's a decision they take to protect their profits, that they want to carry on making profits. So in order to carry on making profits when their own costs are increasing, that things are getting harder to produce, there's supply chain disruption, there's shortages of some goods, in order to protect their profits, they will put up prices instead. And you can see this most clearly on oil and gas. BP and Shell, two huge producers, both in Britain, based in headquartered in Britain, have made profits jointly of about $40 billion over the last year. I mean, astronomical amounts of money. That the price that they can sell their oil and gas at has shot up. The actual cost of them producing it hasn't changed at all. So they're just making windfall profits. And so are a whole load of other producers. So if you want to think about what we can do about this, the point to get to is say, look, we don't have to accept that prices go up. Why is the price of gas going up in Britain? Because the government, in the form of Ofgem, the regulator, has decided to put the price of gas up for domestic customers 56%. Doesn't have to do that. And if there's costs that are out there, we should be squeezing profits. And if people are being hit by price rises, their wages need to go up. It's not wages driving inflation, it's protecting profits in a world of instability that's driving inflation. So if you want to do something about this, wage rises have to happen, and they have to be higher than the rate of inflation, and they have to happen right the way across pretty much anybody who's worked, especially after the last couple of years or so where wages have been so subject to so much pressure otherwise. That's my quick summary of where we are at this point, and I think we move on to questions and answers at the end. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. There were some incredible points, especially around the need for increased wages, this automatic default to passing on any increase in costs to the consumer, even though these companies are making billions and billions of pounds, and the whole, the impact of crises, of war, of pandemics on supply chains, and why everything seems so unstable at the moment. Thank you. That was an amazing contribution. Do have to self-correct. I made a little dyslexic error with your name. It's James Meadway. I even checked before I started speaking, and then my brain was like, no. So your name is James Meadway. That was an incredible contribution. I'll bring you in at the end for question and answers, if that's okay. And I'll just introduce our next speaker, who is Catt Hobbs. Catt is the founder and director of We Own It, a campaign for public ownership that has recently developed 4 demands to take back our energy. Catt, could you please tell us some more about that?
Thank you, Chantelle, and thanks for inviting me. Great to be here today. So, as Chantelle said, I'm from We Own It. We campaign for public services for people, not profit. And so we think in general that privatisation has failed, that it's increased prices of things that we pay for every day, things like public transport fares, energy bills, water bills. And as James said, we think, people are profiting from our system right now when they should be being squeezed. But I'm going to focus in particular today on energy, given that that's such a huge part of this crisis, and that's the bit that we've developed some demands around. So right now we run our energy system entirely for shareholders rather than for regular people, and rather than for the planet. And what we're seeing with the energy crisis is that bills are going to be up to possibly £3,000 a year. 8.5 million people are at risk of being unable to heat their homes. Obviously, and as James said, there's lots of different factors going on here. Public ownership isn't a silver bullet in this situation, but it is a tool that government could use to cut energy bills and to plan for a greener future, so that we're not so dependent on gas in the future. So we have put together a petition and outlined a kind of proposition of 4 things that we think need to happen, and that's aimed at Rishi Sunak and Kwasi Kwarteng, and we're asking for a public commitment by the 1st of April. We're going to keep hammering this because we think it's really important to create as much space for alternatives on this as possible. So the 4 things that we're asking for are a permanent windfall tax on oil and gas companies like Shell and BP at a rate of 56%, which is what Norway does, a new state-owned renewable energy company, bringing the grids into public ownership, and creating a new publicly owned energy supply company. And I'm going to go through those 4 things, but I'm going to share a few slides to do so, because the energy system is horrendously complicated. And that's part of, I think, why it's hard to resist what's happening right now, because there's so many different components. So I'm going to try and shed a little bit of light on that. And I will share my screen if I can. Okay, somebody stop me if none of this is showing up. Hopefully what you can see right now is the 4 steps that I just mentioned of what we think should happen to our energy system. So natural resources like oil, gas, wind, sun, hydropower, we would say belong to all of us if they belong to anyone. And so what we want to see is a long-term strategy where we're copying countries like Norway. As James mentioned, the profits that oil and gas companies have had are absolutely huge. So Commonwealth research shows that they've handed out almost £200 billion to shareholders since 2010. And it would cost around £20 billion to keep our energy bills stable. So Shell and BP's profits since 2010 would cover that amount more than 7 times over. Of course, this year they're expected to make a further 40 billion in profits. And they've not even been paying corporation tax on their North Sea operations. The UK, in a sense, has, people talk about it having, won nature's lottery in terms of oil and gas. Obviously, we need to stop drilling in the long term, but it's, we've got oil and gas, we've got huge potential for wind and hydropower, and we've essentially squandered it. And I think it's really useful to compare to a country like Norway. So this is a graph showing the tax that government has taken in Norway versus the UK per barrel of oil. So in Norway, oil and gas companies pay a corporation tax of 22%, and they pay a special tax of 56%, which is essentially a permanent windfall tax. So for every £100 that Norway collects in tax on barrels of oil in the North Sea, here in the UK, we only collect £8, which is just absurd. So no wonder we don't have much money to play with here. So Norway had already developed its hydropower, so 98% of its energy is renewable anyway, and then it set up Statoil, now Equinor, now 67% owned by the Norwegian state, and they created, from their oil wealth, they created a sovereign wealth fund of $1.4 trillion. What that means is they have money to play with, and Norway is paying 80% of people's energy bills above a capped price. So yes, we need to stop drilling, we need to stop relying on oil and gas, but we should at the very least be taxing these companies to the hilt and using that money to deal with the crisis. So that's our first point. The second point is we think the government ought to be setting up a new state-owned renewable energy company. So right now, around half of our offshore wind is publicly owned, but only a tiny percentage of that is publicly owned by the UK, which is a huge missed opportunity for a country with our geography. So other countries do this. They have publicly owned renewable energy companies. So Norway again owns Statkraft, which is the largest renewables generator in Europe. It's considering setting up, the Norwegian government is considering setting up a state-owned hydrogen company. Denmark owns half of Ørsted, which was previously Dong Energy. That's the world's largest developer of offshore wind power. And here in the UK, we just ignore all the potential that we could use. But it doesn't need to be that way. It wouldn't cost anything. We wouldn't need to buy back any companies to create a new publicly owned renewable energy company to help us reduce our dependence on fossil fuels like gas and transition towards renewable power like wind and water. This company could operate locally, regionally, nationally, and it could help to deliver a just transition for climate crisis. So it could be skilling up workers, providing decent UK jobs, helping to level up communities, and the profits would be flowing to the UK public purse instead of flowing out of the country. So the third demand that we are calling for is we think that energy transmission and distribution should be in public. Oh, meant to share that slide. That's just about Denmark. So we think that the energy transmission and distribution should be in public hands. So a bit of your energy bill that no one is really talking about right now is the network costs. And as you can see from this diagram, that's about a quarter of your energy bill. So it's a substantial chunk. And what happens with energy transmission and distribution is that you have a set of totally privatized monopolies that profit from your bill and you don't have any choice about using them. So the UK is the only country in Europe that has fully privatised its transmission grid, apart from Portugal, which was forced to privatise after the financial crisis. But we have made a really strange decision to say we have a natural monopoly here of transmission of energy from where it's generated to power stations, and we've chosen to have that fully privatised. In 2021, National Grid shareholders received £1.4 billion in dividends. That's money that could have been reinvested, could have been used to reduce your bills or to invest in greener energy. So that's one bit of it. After the energy's been transmitted, it's then distributed. So there's a handful of privatised distribution companies which take gas and electricity to your home. And again, shareholders from around the world profit from these monopolies. So if, for example, you're based in the Northeast, then electricity is delivered to your home by Northern Power Grid. That is owned by the American conglomerate Berkshire Hathaway, which is owned by the US billionaire Warren Buffett. If you're in London, the Southeast or the East of England, it's UK Power Networks. And last summer, they paid their billionaire Hong Kong owner, Li Ka-shing, £237 million in dividends for the second year in a row. So there's a huge amount of money being taken out of the system here and just handed over to shareholders because they happen to be owning these bits of the energy system. If we brought energy into public ownership, the energy networks into public ownership, that would save £3.7 billion a year, enough to buy 222 offshore wind turbines. And that would be an investment. We would have to buy out the companies. We would have to compensate the shareholders. But we've calculated, well, the University of Greenwich has calculated that would pay for itself in around 7 years. And then the fourth thing is about supply. So that's the company that you actually buy your energy from. It doesn't deliver the energy to your home, but it organises your bills, essentially. And there's a whole messy, chaotic market right now in supply. So there's never been a better time to create a publicly owned energy supply company. It would be able to make sure that it play a role in making bills more affordable, plan for fluctuations in global prices, and invest in renewables. And publicly owned energy supply companies are normal in other countries. So in Germany, France, and Italy, most people get their energy from a publicly owned energy supply company. Prices are around 20 to 30% lower in systems with public ownership. And in Germany and France, 2/3 of people get their energy from these kinds of companies. So in France, what they've done with EDF, which is 80% state-owned, is the government has said EDF will take a hit in this energy crisis so that households can be cushioned, which means that in France, energy bills won't be rising by more than 4%. Meanwhile, here in the UK, we've had 40 energy supply companies going bust, 6 million customers affected. The market is in chaos. And what the government has been doing is, if the companies are small enough, it just lets them collapse. If they're larger, it effectively bails them out, props them up. So for Bulb, they've spent 1.7, it'll be at least £1.7 billion on a loan of public money to keep this company afloat, which is more than £1,000 per customer. So essentially, it's a very wasteful system where the government is stepping in to rescue some of these big companies and getting nothing back. There's a much better way, which is to have a public option, to have a publicly owned supply option. And so when companies fail, that organisation just takes over their customers and they're transferred automatically. So we think there's never been a better time for energy that works for people and planet rather than profit. We're going to make this case. There's a petition that you can sign, and it's on this link here. It's obviously hard to win with this government, but even if we don't win, we can create some space in the conversation for at least a windfall tax. In April, obviously, we're going to be hit with even higher bills. It's going to hit people really, really hard. This problem isn't going anywhere. So I think the more we can do to show people solutions, the better, because energy should be working for all of us. And I hope you saw my slides during that. Thank you.
Yeah, we could see your slides, Catt. They were brilliant. Thank you for that. That was so informative. And yeah, I absolutely agree. Anyone sat with a blanket instead of the heating on at the moment will agree those bills are absolutely eye-watering, and it does seem like public ownership is the way forward. Do like most of Europe. So if anyone wants to sign that petition, it's in the comments section of this video, the link to that, and I do encourage you to sign the petition. So I'll hand over to Laura now. Laura Smith is a former Labour Party MP for Crewe, a teacher, a trade unionist and a community activist. And Laura's going to talk to us about how the cost of living crisis is grounded in long-term projects of austerity by the government and how these new developments will affect working class people. Over to you, Laura.
Oh, thanks so much, Chantelle. And yeah, I mean, it feels bleak, doesn't it, at the moment? It's impossible to avoid it. And I'm not going to lie to you, my contribution will probably be ever so slightly depressing, but hopefully end on a more positive note. Because, look, we've been having a battering for so long. So even if you were somehow lucky enough to avoid the financial crisis and all that's happened since, or, you know, you haven't particularly felt the suffering due to the political choice of austerity, our public services have been decimated over the last 10 years. We've seen it in schools. I was a primary school teacher. That is what really pushed me into politics, was seeing the impact of austerity and what that was having on 5, 6, 7-year-old children. Frankly, if you haven't noticed the crisis that we've been feeling for such a long time, it must mean that you've been lucky enough to be in a privileged position. Or on the other side of it, be like a Tory MP who seems to just lack any natural basic human empathy. Currently, you know, we have a government that's so corrupt, so up to their eyeballs in deceit and greed, that it can feel as somebody watching completely overwhelming. You are probably sat there like me, feeling fairly alienated by politics at the moment, thinking, my gosh, can it get worse? And then it seems to. As I said, this starts depressing and hopefully picks up. For some people, you know, they talk about the good times, don't they? They talk about the good times of being able to get on the housing ladder and all of this. But God, I long for the good times. I really do. For me, born in the 1980s to a working class family, I'm kind of waiting for them to start. Because my life, like so many people who will be listening, living currently, you know, my life has been debt to be educated, and high rents and wage stagnation and bills and bills and bills and work, and then more debt and not many holidays and a hell of a lot of anxiety. And I think this is something that, you know, people talk about the mental health crisis in this country. It doesn't take a genius to surely figure out that the fact that so many people are financially suffering is going to be directly linked to the fact that people's mental health is suffering too. For me, any problems I've had with anxiety, mental health in the past have come down basically to money. And I've said this many times before, the embarrassment and shame that people can feel because of it. Sometimes, you know, I also say this, at times in my life I've had more money and been lucky enough to maybe not feel that kind of dread when the postman comes, or I get another email into my inbox that says that something's going up. Sometimes it hasn't been as bad as others. But one thing that people from working class backgrounds have is this kind of lack of, you know, if you've grown up in a working class background, then you struggle to have the financial security. So you never get into that safe space with money where that house of cards, if it begins to sort of wobble, begins to topple. that you have somebody there who's going to pick it all up for you. And I think this, sadly, is what a lot of people are going to be facing now, because the house of cards is starting to wobble for many people who might have managed to avoid it up until this point. And look, when I was an MP between 2017 and 2019, I knew things were bad for people. I really did. But it was week after week, in surgery after surgery, I would meet people who were desperately trying to navigate a system that was frankly so corrupt and so biased. So many people plagued with depression on top of everything else, because when you're poor, it's bloody tiring and it's hard work. And that's how I've always described it to people. If you haven't got that hefty pot of inheritance waiting for you, it's exhausting. You're always working hard, battling daily just to get what comes to others. It can seem to be so easily, and the system, frankly, is rigged up against you. And now we're in this strange world where COVID's not yet gone, but the government are trying to forget it. I've just read that actually hospital admissions are on the rise again, but we're not really reporting that. We've got this next wave of austerity, and we all know who's going to be paying the price. Again, it's not going to be the people with the broadest shoulders. It's going to fall on those who really have not got the ability to be able to stretch any further. And teamed with the fact, as James was talking about, we've now got this awful war, and the coverage daily of what's happening there. And I'm actually finding more and more people who I speak to on a daily basis are saying things like, oh gosh, I don't know how I'm going to manage with this rise in my electricity bill. But it could be worse. It could be worse. I could be like such and such over in Ukraine. And look, we cannot lose how severe this cost of living crisis is. And there's always people who are worse off, but we cannot let the narrative totally disappear on this, so that we're not putting the pressure on the government, so that we're not holding our politicians to account. Because look, wages must go up, prices must be held down by price controls. The squeeze must be on profits and not on people. We've got this problem with, you can predict it, that inflation is going to be used as the argument. It already is happening against wage increases and public spending. With inflation rising, calls are growing to rise rates and suck the demand out of the economy. And if those arguments are heeded, then our chance to break from neoliberalism and consolidate some of those shifts that occurred during COVID, they'll be lost. That opportunity will be lost. Flexible working hours, for example, being able to see that people can work from home and be more productive. They're trying to take that away from us already, and we'll be locked back into our low demand, low productivity, high carbon, high inequality economic model. And I'm kind of disgusted to see the patronizing brigade of people who are appearing, as they do, on Twitter, and they're out telling people things like, well, put on a jumper if you're cold, or walk, don't drive if you're moaning about your car and the cost of it. And why haven't you tried these budget recipes? And the reality is, these people have no idea what it is like when you are day to day dealing with this grind, when you probably live in a house that isn't adequately insulated, that has a very, an old boiler model. All of these things that mean that you are less likely, your bills are going to be higher, that this system, again, is stacked up against you. And I was very surprised to see people who have a banner of my political party who were offering this kind of advice on Twitter to people. What we need to be doing is standing as a collective, not making it on the individual, on the personal choices, telling people that they can bring their electricity bill down. That's just ludicrous. We can see what is happening. We have huge corporations, huge businesses, just as was said before, where shareholders who aren't even in this country are making huge amounts of profit over the fact that we need to heat our houses, we need to feed our families, all of those things that should just be a given. I honestly don't know, Chantelle, to be honest, when were there always this many scabs about? I don't know. Were there always these kind of people who were sticking the boot in? Probably. But look, we also need to remember that not everybody is feeling this. Not everybody is feeling this crisis that we're talking about. In fact, there is a tiny percentage who are getting richer and richer by the day. Our Chancellor will be included in that. And he is choosing not to make those people pay, even though we're in this bizarre situation where, in fact, some of the millionaires and billionaires are admitting that the system is rigged in their favour, and they're spotting that maybe they should be taking the tax rise. And if they did, the social care levy could be paid, I think, twice over every year, with change, by the way, and could save people that hit on the national insurance increase. But of course, because of all of this corruption, because of all of these deals that are done, etc., our government, and these relationships are forged when they start their prep schools. They're not looking at those people to be taking the cost. How dare the governor of the Bank of England, as James said, how dare he tell people not to ask for a pay rise? This is somebody who earns over £500,000 a year. And I say to people, you need to, yes, the trade unions aren't in the situation that they have been in, at the height of the trade union, but we need to start building in our trade unions. People need to join those who are fighting, who are winning battles on wages. The fact is that in a unionised workplace, you will earn more than others in a similar field who are not in a union. So what other things can we do? Right, the positive stuff. We need to start fighting back. I hear on calls all the time. We're all in agreement, really, about what needs to happen. What we need to do is somehow manage to build that coalition across the labour movements, be able to work together to demand these key things. We have to kind of put some of the differences that have been purposefully on occasions pushed at us in order to cause these divides, and we have to discover a way to bring people with us and stop being so fragmented, because it's the only way that we are going to win. And we need to agree on the need to, we do agree on the need to organise, to unionise, to politically educate, to build power in local communities. We just need to start the action part. And I think there is a need for big demonstrations, and we're seeing things like that, but we also need to reach into places that are often left behind. I say, for instance, let's put a Manchester demo on, for example, in Crewe or in Lee, or get the key activists, get people like you, Chantelle, going and speaking in these communities, get people organising in town halls. Let's have meetings about the cost of living, reach out to trade union reps in big workplaces and create local campaigns pushing back on this crisis. Because people are time poor, right? They're not only stressed out and worried and anxious, they're also time poor. So we have to take this to them, because they're not going to hear it half the time off the mainstream media. So we have to think of alternative ways. And the government is in deep crisis, and the unions really need to shift towards organising and mobilising workers to ensure that they get the pay rise that they deserve. And anything less than a 7.5 pay rise is a pay cut. That is the reality of this. And factoring in the ground that's already been lost since inflation climbed each month since last summer, plus the decade of austerity, workers should not settle for anything less than double digits. There's many other things that we could do, but I am aware that I've kind of rabbited on. So lastly, and to finish, I think as a movement, we need to recognise nobody's coming here to save us. They're not. There has to be a wider labour movement push against this that uses every single lever of power that we have. Otherwise, what will happen is people will continue to have the burden piled up on their shoulders. We need more people who are going to start to help out, who are going to maybe, and I'm guilty of it too, step away from Twitter and things like this and move into the real world and the real space and go and talk to some people and bring them on that journey. And we need to kind of get people angry, but we need to get them to want better, to feel like they deserve better. And then we need to take action. And if not now, then when? Because this crisis is with us now, Chantelle. I'll stop there. I don't know how long I kind of rabbited on for.
I could listen to you all day, Laura. That was powerful, absolutely incredible. And you spoke to, the experiences of the people on the margins, who are the people who are going to feel it the harshest. And it's just patronising to come at people with pull yourself up by your bootstraps, make a curry out of what you've got in the fridge, and really, advice that's nothing advice. I read an article which was basically giving tips on how to save like a £5 a year when bills are going up by like £500 a year. And I was just like, come on. But I agree, we need a many-pronged attack. We need activists, we need labour, we need trade unions, we need everyone getting involved. Off the top of my head, I know someone's asking the chat, I know the People's Assembly are doing national mobilisations against the rising cost of living, so I'd say check them out, and hopefully we know if any others will put it in the comments. But thank you for that contribution, Laura. We've got one more speaker, and then I know you guys have been putting some amazing questions in the chat. Once we've heard from Sam, we'll ask some of your questions. We won't be able to ask all of them, but we'll ask a few. So our last speaker is Sam Auerto, who is a member of United Voices of the World Union and currently on strike action against Great Ormond Street Hospital. Before I hand over, oh yeah, it's okay. We've got our questions in the chat. But Sam, over to you if you want to tell us about your campaigns and about the cost of living crisis. If you could just unmute, Sam.
Sorry. Thank you, everyone. As my beautiful lady said, my name is Samuel. We've been on strike. I work at Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. I've been working there for the past 7 years. And within these 7 years, I've passed through 3 outsourced companies, namely Mighty, OCS, and currently with Carlisle. And we've been on 6-week strike. And so far, gosh, management, have managed to ignore us. Every attempt to engage, they've been ignoring us the whole time. But we are not perturbed. They've inject us as well. They took us to court to place injunction on us. Our union managed to engage with their solicitors, which cost the union about 22,000, to negotiate from being banned within 200 meters from the hospital. Now we can come within 50 meters, and then 6 people can picket in front of the hospital, which they've been trying to avoid so far. So I've listened to the earlier speakers, and the worst form of privatization is outsourcing. I can tell you that. And outsourcing is just taking money from working and suffering people and putting it back in the pocket of already rich people, which I see as a new form of slavery. And coupled with the cost of living and all that, and rising cost of living, is like taking the life support of someone who is already dying. So for me, I'll add to the voice of earlier speakers who are calling for the union to be able to mobilize. you know, because what is happening is even more than the pandemic, you know. It's actually killing people's dreams, killing people's destiny. So we gotta have to, mobilize and put and come together as a collective force to be able to withstand and push back on the storm of privatization and cost of living, and the worst of it all is outsourcing, you know, especially within the NHS. You know, our aim and dream is to rid the NHS of outsourcing, you know, because outsourcing is not doing any good to, the NHS, and to add to it, you're making the people that work within these sectors more poorer, you know. So a lone tree, it cannot stand a storm, you know. So for me, I will call on the trade union movement, and then the trade union leadership, and then the big union, like Unite, Unison, and all that, to be able to, to add their voice to what is happening, because these people are trying to kill the union movement, and demonstration and then picketing is the only way our messages could be heard, or our voices could be heard. And now there is an attempt to demolish all that, so I will urge everybody, we need to put our differences aside, and forge together as a force, as a collective force, to be able to challenge authority, to be able to speak truth to power. You see, because people who are in authority today, they think they are insulated and nothing could touch them. Nobody can do anything to them, but we put them there. So if they are refusing to take decisions and make decisions that will inure to the benefit of the common man, or the common people who just want to survive, who just want to live a decent life through working hard, and they've been denying all these things. You get it? You see? So for me, I will urge everybody listening to me to be able to, the conversations have been going on for a while now, and the talking has gone on for some time now. We need to be able to mobilize and then force these people to change course. We need to force them to change course, especially outsourcing, because outsourcing, for me, is a new form of slavery. It's a new form of slavery. We have to do anything and everything to kick against and make sure we stop it. Make sure it has to be stopped. Because if we read about the slavery, people are taken from their place of dwelling and then carried somewhere. And there's always a middleman. When these people have to go and work, they have no say about their working condition. They have no say about how they are going to be treated. The one who required the labor speak to the slave master, and the slave master now decide what the person who is requiring this labor should pay. And as they work, they have no say. That's the same thing. If you compare it to today, it's the same thing as outsourcing. You get it? Because for myself, I've been working in the hospital for years. And what the hospital is saying is that they decided to go outsourcing because it brings efficiency, and then to safeguard the public purse. What is the proof that outsourcing is saving money? But if you listen to the conversation, you can see the contrary is happening. Outsourcing is a more way of wasting money and just putting money in people's pockets. You see? So these companies, what do they do? What do they do? We do the job. We are the same people doing the job, and you are telling me now you have to buy it. If you don't put me out there, if God does not put me out there on the market, how can Carlisle come and then bid for that contract? And now decided writing rules for me, because I've been working 7 years there now. But now They've taken hold of me and they are writing rules for me to obey. So if that is not modern day slavery, I don't know what it is. You know, and they are making money at my expense. Now, within these 7 years, I have to change 3 pension providers because each company that takes over comes with their own pension provider. And what does that tell you? You know, so I don't have guarantee. I don't have any guaranteed future. You see, so all these things is destroying people's dreams. It's killing us. So we gotta have to pull together, and then the hierarchy of labor party have to be, you know, start speaking. Have to start speaking. And last time at the picket rally, I was asking that the constituency where Gosh, you know, is Keir Starmer's constituency. You know, it's good he's talking about Ukraine and all that, but there is serious problem happening right there in your constituency. He has not said a word about it. You know, so for me, everything that is happening now is just killing us finally. You know, because you know, cost of living is going through the roof, and our wages are the same. You know, so I just want to pause here and then encourage everybody to keep the actions on, and then keep mobilizing and keep the conversation going. But then we should mobilize as a force to be able to, you know, force government's hand, to force people who are in leadership and authority to force their hands to change course, so they listen to the people, you know, so people can live decent life. That's all I'll say. You know, as I'm on strike now, 6 weeks, and I'm in 5th week. I'm not going to get paid. I'm not going to be paid. I'm not going to be paid. But what forced me to go on strike? It's not my wish to go on strike, because I felt that is the only way I'll be listened to. And so far, God's leadership have ignored us. They continue to ignore us because they think even people in higher authority, you know, support what they're doing. So we should keep the conversation going, and then we support the smaller unions like UVW. So far, the union have been with us. They've been in the trenches with us. You know, they've been out with us. So any other way people can support, they should try to support us, so we can keep, you know, the fight going on. Because if we win that fight, it means that there's hope for other government institutions, workers of government institutions who are fighting to be brought into the mainstream instead of outsourcing and all that. So I'm going to end here by thanking everybody, by thanking the organizers of this forum, that you keep the conversation going, and then together we'll win, and we change, we change things for the better, and history will be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Just so much passion in that speech, and massive solidarity with you and everyone who's on strike and who has been on strike for the past 6 weeks. It's appalling the way you're being treated, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're trying to basically push through the court an injunction which stops you from protests that are too noisy or annoying or use chants. And for anyone who's keeping up with the police crime sentencing and court bill and the Kill the Bill campaign, you will know that this is essentially the police crime sentencing and courts bill which bans protest in action. So we really do need to fight. We absolutely need to get behind this campaign, and there's more information about the campaign in the comments section. It'll just tell you how you can support UVW. So massive big up to you guys. I'm going to go to the questions section now and ask a few questions. As I said, I won't be able to get to all of them because there's quite a few and I don't think we've got that much time left, but we'll go to the first one, which is how come France keep rises to 4% while we're paying 74%? I know they own most of our energy supply, and EDF profits went up by 44% already, so they can subsidise French people. But what are we going to do about it here? So essentially, I think it's why France's price is so low, yet ours are so high. I know Catt and James, you spoke about this, so I don't know if one of you guys wants to answer that one. Go on, James.
All right, should I have a go? Yeah, it's a very good question, because it's like there isn't there's no real reason for this to happen. There's nothing like in the water in France or in the electricity in France that's different to here. I mean, they make more of it from nuclear power, but the problems of rising costs, of rising input prices are affecting nuclear power, and the problem of being able to sell that electricity into the rest of Europe is also there for that nuclear power generation. So that's not really the issue here. The really decisive thing, the reason that prices are going up only 4% in France and 56% or so in Britain, is because the French government said that prices should go up 4% in France, and the British government said prices should go up 56%. The Ofgem is the government regulator here, and they said the price cap from last year, that's the limit and the most that you can pay for your home heating, for your gas bill, has got to go up 56% or thereabouts in April. That's another £700 a year on the average bill. In France, they haven't done that. And it's made easier if your electricity generator is publicly owned. I mean, EDF, Électricité de France, is 85, I mean, can't be able to say, or thereabouts publicly owned. So it's really a majority publicly owned. But the real driver here was that the French government is just frightened of another Gilets jaunes protest turning up. So if people remember, in late 2018 into 2019, huge protests right up and down France of people demanding that in this case, rises in petrol taxes weren't going to go up, and a whole bunch of other things it spilled into as well. And the French government really, really, really does not want that movement on the streets again. And in order to avoid it, they're capping the price of electricity charges that people in France pay. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's politics that determines this. It isn't the market. It isn't some magic, mysterious other force. If you've got a government that wants to do it, or in the case of France, is kind of scared, so it feels compelled to do it, then it will happen. If we had a movement on the streets here, if we had a mass protest movement in Britain, the same thing could happen here for pretty much the same reasons.
Love. Make them remember who they serve. Basically, we the people. I mean, if anyone's ever seen French people protest, it is a beautiful sight to behold. Just everyone on the streets, firefighters out there. It's no wonder the government are scared, and so they should be. And so that should be at the forefront of all government's mind. What do the people want? What do they need? But unfortunately, we don't seem to get that here. Catt, did you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, I mean, just agreeing with James, really, that it's a choice. You know, our government keeps making choices that make energy really unaffordable for us, and none of this is inevitable. You know, it's a choice not to protect consumers, not to, keep our bills low. It's a choice not to tax our oil and gas properly. You know, those natural resources that we've ended up with. You know, it's a choice not to develop wind and hydropower, and really, it's a choice to sort of prioritise shareholders, and I think, building on what James said, really, it's not like the weather or something. These are political decisions, and what we have to somehow get across is that this is not inevitable. It doesn't have to be this way. And when people voted for a government that talked about taking back control, we're doing the absolute opposite. The people who are in control are shareholders far away. They're the people who are benefiting, and we are not. So we have to get that message across, that it doesn't have to be this choice by this government.
Oh, sorry, trying to unmute yourself then. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you, Catt. So next, and probably the last question, ties in nicely to those comments and points made. What leverage do trade unions have to impact this crisis? Do workers have the power to demand policy change in addition to better working conditions? And I'm going to look at Laura and I'm going to look at Sam for this one. Laura, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few different points here. So we kind of ask why France gets the results that it does, and Italy, etc. But then we kind of need to get over ourselves a little bit in this country, because so often the response is quite meek, and we need to kind of understand what we're up against here. These are people who are just getting away with daylight robbery, with murder. I mean, they must just sit and rub their hands together. And then, of course, what do? They do exactly what we saw with the RMT, with the underground strikes. They smear them, and they get all of the usual suspects out, giving them a hard time on on Twitter, etc. I mean, I was a primary school teacher. We had it the same. They will always attack workers who are striking, but we have to stay strong. We have to show that solidarity. I work closely with bus strikers in Manchester, and there was smearing in the local papers about them, but the community was 100% behind them. The strikers went out, they spoke to the community about it. The community were on board. They understood what was happening, and whatever the papers and the local news and etc. threw at them, it didn't matter, because the public were with these guys. And I think we need to remember that although the news might sound very negative, etc., we need to be brave, stick together and keep fighting, because that is the only way that we will change things. I think the trade unions do a lot, are doing a lot. We need more people to be joining a trade union. If you're not in a trade union, I recommend being in one, finding out how a trade union actually works, what it can do, how you can organise within. We've got loads of campaigns that are running at the moment where we're looking at where that we do have influence and power. It's not all about Westminster. We have local councils who you can kind of make a difference, putting pressure on. We've got the metro mayors, etc., etc. There's lots of things that can happen outside of Westminster and this Tory government. And the one thing I would say to people is, don't let Westminster suck all your energy away. And they will try and do that all the time. The Westminster bubble isn't just about Westminster and the people in it. The Westminster bubble is something that takes over everybody's thoughts and pulls them there and stops them looking at what's happening near to them, what they could change locally to them. And I think we need to start having a much more localized approach. And definitely that should be involving local trade unions and making sure, first and foremost, you're a member of one, and then finding a branch, go and talk to people. I've seen branches that have just popped out of nowhere and now are organising things for the People's Assembly, etc., etc. So it can happen, and it can make a huge difference to people. So yes, that's pretty much it, I think, from me.
Amazing, thank you, Laura. Join a union. That was my takeaway message there. Join a union, join a campaign, get involved. I can't see Sam on my screen anymore, so I'm going to assume that the internet has maybe cut out. But I would just say, guys, that it looks bleak, but as Laura has said, that is how they want it to look. There are national campaigns with the People's Assembly. There's local campaigns. Again, as Laura's alluded to, you've got your local politicians, you've got national politicians. We don't have to take this lying down. The French would not take it lying down. Be more French. Let's get involved in activism. Let's campaign against this. Massive, massive, huge thank you to all of our panelists for their incredible contributions. Please donate to TWT. Check out our socials. Check out the comment section for links to all of the campaigns that we've discussed, all of the petitions. We've got our little link just below the screen. Make a donation at bit.ly/TWT donate. I could well be Davina. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. Good night. Have a blessed week, everybody. See you later.
Bye.